Welcome, classmates, to our first discussion. For mine, I chose to read the piece called Reading the Bible with the Founding Fathers, written by Daniel Dreisbach. And we were tasked with reading any chapter in the book. So for myself, I picked the 6th chapter, A Defense of Liberty Against Tyrants, the Bible, the Right of Resistance, and the American Revolution. Just something about that title really caught my attention and eye. It opens up with a couple of Bible verses that it brings out, and it talks about obeying versus not to obey. Should you obey the government, the leadership, or the monarch over you? And a couple of verses that they bring out very early on, Acts 5:29, obey God rather than men. But then it gives as a clear example of this, of obeying God, it brings out the story of Daniel, where he is going to disobey the laws of a king and is sentenced to a den of lions. And it is the divine approval that protects him while he is in there. But then we see later with 1 Peter, where it talks about the magistrates, again, government officials that are acting and carrying out the will of God, and to disobey them would imply that you are disobeying God's will. The big question then comes down to, as it moves forward, it brings about the talks of Luther and Calvin. And neither one literally said that it would give in to overthrowing governments, but it also does not mean unlimited submission. In other words, do not always give in to an oppressive government. And Calvin perhaps says it best when he writes that the prince that governs in the opposition of God forfeits the duty of the subjects to obey. And that really starts to bring home a lot of this theme that will eventually result in the American Revolution. Another pamphlet that came out during this time period, where it talks about, and I'm going to try to pronounce the name, I apologize, I'm probably going to horribly butcher this, Vindicea. It talks about how there is a double covenant with the people, where the first covenant is between God and the prince or the people, and that obeying God by the prince and the people brings stability and prosperity to the region, to the area that they are in charge over. But the second one is in a covenant between the people and the prince, or the leadership, the government at the time. And that failure of the prince, can lead to the permission for resistance. Another great piece that also helps play into this whole attitude was a piece called Lex Rex by Samuel Rutherford. Now, as we all know, that is not Samuel standing there to the side, but Henry VIII. But it brings about a great principle that in this piece it talks about law comes before the king, and at the end of the day, no one is above the law, and of course the law of God will put above all, so that the king would have to answer underneath. Interestingly enough, this was published during the English Civil War, and after the English Civil War ended, it was burned. But these attitudes come over to America, and in what is considered to be the most famous sermon of the pre-revolutionary period was one by the Reverend Jonathan Mayhew, who titled the sermon A Discourse Concerning Unlimited Submission and Non-Resistance to Higher Powers. He basically makes it very, very clear that it is a glorious Christian duty to rebel against tyrants. And he uses Romans 13 to help support this, that civil rulers are to be obeyed, but if their rulings are inconsistent with the commands of God, then they are not to be. As we move beyond the writings of this chapter, I felt that a lot of this information, we really see it coming out in Common Sense. Probably one of the most famous pieces. Thomas Paine is going to write it, and where he talks about 1 Samuel 8, and he uses a verse that was where God is warning the people about kings, and that he uses that warning as a call for separation from England would be considered divine will. Shortly after that was published, we have the Reverend Samuel Sherwood, who gives a sermon called The Church's Flight into the Wilderness, where he basically supports and builds up a lot of the beliefs from Common Sense, talking about the need to break away from England and progress forward. And of course, no look at our founding fathers could be complete without George Washington. I found it interesting that in what is considered to be his first official order after assuming command, issued July 4th, 1775, he actually orders his command and the troops among him to attend divine service, and that this attendance would help implore the blessings of the heavens upon the means be used of our safety and defense. A year later, July 9th, 1776, Washington does issue a second general order to his military, or there were numerous other orders, but another order that fits with this theme of justification, using Christianity and the Bible to justify the revolution, and where he informs or implores his soldiers to live and act as Christian soldiers. Finally, there is the Declaration of Independence, which everything up to this point kept talking about how if a ruler is going against the will of God and is turning into a tyrant, then justification for overthrow. The Declaration of Independence establishes that as it lays out the evidence on why the King of England is considered a tyrant. Thank you.